As in every good story, we wanted to give you a little bit of the build-up before we talk about what happened this morning. That was the verdict after the trial where she represented herself and said not one word. I'd like to reintroduce my guest and bring a new one in, Julie Rendelman, who worked for the DA's office, now a defense attorney. Katie Smith does civil rights cases. She worked for the Corporation Counsel's Office in New York City, now a defense attorney. Everyone comes here. And then there's Gene Rossi, my man Gene, who is in Virginia. Gene worked 30 years for the Department of Justice, and he's tapping his card. Well, either that's from me or the Department of Justice.
That's
I don't know. No.
That's
so
for you.
Gene is now also a defense attorney. So you have four of us on the air. Gene, what is your initial reaction to the verdict for guilty?
You know, it breaks my heart that she didn't take advantage of the people who represented her. One big thing is you always poll the jury. Always poll the jury, unless you're the prosecutor. That's number one. She waived that.
Now, why do you poll the jury? Let me see if I can get Katie. Why do you poll the jury?
Well, I do.
Poll means ask them if they agree with the verdict.
Right. No, of course. I mean, most of my experience is civil rights cases, and we always poll the jury just to see that they are able to all, unanimously agree that that's what the verdict was. I mean, usually it's not a contention in my cases. I think the criminal case is a little different.
And sometimes you'll get a juror who says,
I didn't totally agree with that, but
that's
you must, as the defense, always poll the jury. Not when you win,
right.
but when you don't want to ask any questions when
right.
you lose. One of the things I think stood out in my mind was her reaction to the guilty verdict, which is almost completely nonchalant and
smirk. Then you see
with a smirk on her
face.
face.
You see a little smirk in Gene. But the problem is she didn't ask anything. I've called this case suicide by trial, Gene Rossi. Suicide by trial, because she obviously was adept at picking a jury because she asked some questions and got jurors in, but then she just sat there. Do you think she wants to die?
I do. To tell you the truth, I think she feels that she did something very horrendous. She hated that Amani, and that she deserves to die. I really believe that's how she feels right now.
Well, let's listen to what the jury decided this morning. Last night they said they were hung, but they wanted to go home and sleep on it. This morning they came back. Were they still hung? Were they still hung? We don't know yet. But, one of the things I have said when it comes to this case that, the death penalty kind of well, let me put it this way, okay? It assumes that when you represent yourself, you at least do something. She didn't do anything. So did that affect the jury's verdict in the death stage? Let's find out. Gene Rossi, one of the things assumes when you're pro se, this judge said, well, she's determined to be pro se, so she doesn't have to have an attorney. But a pro se means that usually you do something to represent yourself, not that you sit there and do nothing, Gene Rossi, correct?
We, in my U.S. Attorney's Office, we had two high-profile capital cases. They were pro se initially, but the one defendant, I can think of him right away, Chris Wills, he put on a fulsome defense. He was cross-examining. He was calling his own witnesses. Eventually, the judge said, I'm not letting you do this anymore. We're going to have standby counsel. The other was Zacharias Moussaoui, who initially was pro se, but the judge just said, no, we're going to assign counsel, and we're not going to let you do this by yourself.
Okay, so that is Iman Moss. That is the real father, the biological father, I should say, of Imani, who died when she was starved to death when she was 10 years old. Now, Gene Rossi, I kind of think he's believable. I mean, I used the word likable last week, but I didn't mean likable. I mean likable as believable. However, he's the father, and he did nothing. Who do you blame more? Him, who is now life in prison, or his ex? Well, she's not his ex-wife. His second wife, who was the stepmother of Imani, who just got the death penalty.
I got to tell you, I blame him more. This is his blood, and when his wife is calling about his child, and he's believing these crazy stories, and he knows they're not true. You could tell by his demeanor, he didn't think they were true. He just didn't care, and he let Tiffany do whatever she wanted, and I really blame him, absolutely.
So, Jean, the woman we saw in this trial do nothing, Tiffany Moss, was sexy wifey in the text. And sexy wifey would text Imani's natural father, Iman, and say that she boo-booed in the carpet, which means she defecated or she put things in her food. But here, you know, he is in jail for life. When the Supreme Court said, hey, the death penalty is not good unless you have some kind of parity in the Furman versus Georgia case. Interesting, it's the Georgia case that did away with the death penalty until it was more equal. How do you get parity here when you see that he was as much involved in what didn't happen to Imani and what did happen to Imani as sexy wifey was?
Simple. He pleaded guilty. He was given life, and he is cooperating, and he's getting a minimum of life. That will pass any constitutional test.
So can or should have the judge intervene, though, indeed, when she's representing herself in a jury? I want you to know that he got a life sentence and he was given the, you know, he could have been a death penalty candidate, and she was offered a life sentence and refused it. Should that have been told, if true, to the jury?
I'm sure during his testimony that it came out that he pleaded guilty and got life.
How about her? How about her? That she refused it?
You know, that's interesting whether that should have been brought out in the death penalty phase.
What's your thoughts, quickly, yes or no? Because I want to ask Katie. I want to see if I can get you.
I think it should have been brought out if you had standby counsel, yes.
Oh, but that's the issue. No standby
Yes.
counsel. She's pro se. She's not bringing anything out. Interesting. There's so much to talk about on this case, so much. But we have to take one of those quick breaks. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Jean Rossi, thank him for being here. We're just amazed by this testimony. We're going to have more on all these cases with Aaron Keller, the Daily Debrief. Next, I'll be his guest. I want you to stay tuned only here on Law and Crime.